Fears of violence in games makes CoinUp jittery. Multimedia takes on 3D for the future of gaming. And Capcom partners up with Sega. These stories and many, many more on this episode of the Video Game Newsroom Time Machine.
I've been waiting a long time for a chance to say this. Stop the presses.
Requiescat in pace.
It makes him crazy, man. What is a man?
It's me, Mario.
What a mess.
Get over here!
Please save me.
Welcome back to another episode of the Video Game Newsroom Time Machine, the show where we travel back in time to find out what was making headlines in the home computer and video game industries of yesteryear. Today we're going to be traveling back 30 years to September of 1992. I'm Carl, and I'm joined again by everybody's favorite co-host, Voltaire. Welcome back, Voltaire.
Yay, I'm back.
So, last we checked in, you were working on some Quake maps.
Yeah, and there's that Brutalist mapping jam going on, and actually it finishes today, the deadline, so probably it will release in 2 days.
Well, and for the people listening, today is what day?
The 26th of September.
Woohoo!
So we're still in September. So maybe we can do this all in September. So probably when you're listening to this, it's probably released, and you can see that over at slipseer.com.
I'll put a link in the show.
Yeah. And my map is probably in there in that pack, and I submitted it, and I'm decently happy with it. Could always be better, but it's only 2 weeks, so you have to cut corners everywhere to make it happen. But or else it never releases. That's my. I also start mapping without a deadline, and all these maps are just on my hard drive and all half completed because there's no deadline, and I'm just making them myself. And somehow I really need that deadline to produce something. And I think this is my 5th or 6th map within a year, because I started last year with Quake mapping. So,
cool.
Yeah. So I'm quite happy with it. And I don't know for who I'm doing this, but I sort of learning. When you do this, you learn a lot about game design, and you learn to appreciate some things in 3D games or FPS games more than in others. For example, I just completed, I think half an hour ago or maybe an hour ago, I finished Duke Nukem 3D for the very first time. I played it all in my youth and also made maps when I was 12 and playing that, but always with cheats and just the first 2 maps, and never really progressed, just made maps and do some multiplayer, but never played the single player. So now I played the 3 original campaigns, and I finished it just what I said, an hour ago or something. And you see a lot of flaws in that game, especially in the map design.
Yeah, I mean, the map design, and you had mentioned this on Twitter, I think episode 2, which is the one where you're in the space station?
Yeah, that's so confusing.
Yeah.
It's like a labyrinth, and there's a lot of unfamiliar textures. Some textures should be elevator textures, but if you don't know that's an elevator, then you don't press the action button, and then you never use the elevator. And also the same problem with doors. So sometimes you really don't know where you're looking for, and then suddenly you find out something was a door, and it's really hard to figure out that. I think that episode took me 2 hours to complete, and also I played that second episode in another engine, the engine actually of. When you buy Duke Nukem now on Steam, you get the 20th anniversary edition, and that engine is really terrible. So I played it on that, and I thought there's so much wrong. It doesn't feel right. There's input latency and stuff, and then now I upgraded to Race, and that's actually a sort of new engine. And
is that the one that uses an actual 3D engine with the old map?
It actually uses GZ Doom as an engine. So it's sort of they melt Doom and Duke Nukem together, and it still looks like Duke Nukem, and you can also do really nice like ambient inclusion. So the corners are more shadowy, and it looks better, a little bit more modern. But yeah, the shooting action is so much better in that engine. So I would, anybody who wants to play build games, I would really recommend use the Race engine.
Okay.
And
I played through it years ago with this fan-made 3D engine. So
Polymost or something?
Could be. It's been ages since I played through it, but it actually used 3D polygon models for some of the enemies. So they were basically redoing the whole thing in this new engine.
Yeah, but for me that's like, most of the time that looks a bit silly or ugly, and this is just, it looks like Duke Nukem, but it just plays a lot more smooth, and I don't know, it's just still everything is sprite and flat. And actually I played yesterday on stream a new build game called AWOL, AWOL, and
AWOL.
Yeah, AWOL, and that's a new build engine, and it released 10 days ago, and it's free, and you can just download it on Steam and also on itch.io, and it's a different spin on the build engine games, and I quite enjoyed it. A lot of hit scanner enemies, so it's pretty unfair. When they see you, they shoot you almost immediately around the corner, so it's pretty unfair. So you have to save scum a little, but it was a nice atmospheric game. It looks great for build engine. It has some Twin Peaks vibes going on, which I really, really love. So really recommend it to just check it out. It's a really silly game, but
as silly as what a build engine game is supposed to be.
Right. So
come on, that's the fun of it.
It's free, so why not?
Cool. Okay, we have a lot to cover today. So before we can turn on the time machine, remember everybody, follow us on the Twitters and so on and so forth. Links in the show notes. Become a patron so you can get some bonus content. We got a bunch. I've been increasing the number of interviews over on the Patreon just because I've been trying to get rid of the backlog. So ton of good stuff to check out there. And this is the most important part, of course. You get the video versions of our next segment, the 7 Minutes in Heaven, where the co-host will have to play a game that was reviewed in a publication dated September 1992. And remember, we're always using the cover dates, not the actual dates of when the news happened because, well, simplicity, don't send me emails. So we had a lot of big name titles this month to choose from. Mortal Kombat, the arcade game. We have Pinball Dreams on the Amiga. We've got Wolfenstein 3D. All get reviewed this month. But unfortunately, you've played all of those.
Yeah.
So we had to go a little bit deeper. And there were some great games. RoboSport would have been great, especially if we could have done it networked. But I think we found the absolute perfect game for you, one that embodies many of the trends of this moment in time. Are you ready to play It Came from the Desert for the TurboGrafx CD?
Absolutely.
I have to qualify it.
Yeah. Oh, there's more?
What?
Is there more versions?
Oh, the original version on the Amiga is a stone cold classic. It's one of the greatest action adventure games of all time. It's the pinnacle of cinemaware game design. It's where everything that they were trying to do since Defender of the Crown finally worked.
Oh,
Well,
okay.
we'll find out how this is.
Yeah,
So, are you
let's
ready
see.
for your 7 minutes in heaven?
Yeah, let's go.
Okay.
Ants, Buzz. They build cities, wage wars, take slaves to work their underground farms. Some can even fly thousands of feet into the sky and travel across vast oceans. But they never kill for sport. That is solely the domain of Homo sapiens.
Hey, Doc, my old man hunts jackrabbits. I don't think he's a Homo sapien.
No, I don't believe he is, Buzz. But enough of that. Let me show you my latest endeavor.
So, Voltaire, welcome back from your 7 minutes in heaven. For the uninitiated who have not played, it came from the desert for the TurboGrafx CD. And yes, I'm going to keep putting that caveat on the end. How would you describe the game?
It's pretty hard to describe. It's all I did in those. Actually, it was 10 minutes because I thought maybe something will happen. But all I did was watching really low-res videos of actors saying stuff to me, but it didn't make sense at all. And I also had some options to go to locations, and then suddenly a bunch of FMVs are talking again to me again, and that's all I did actually. And also there was something like I thought maybe a sort of action segment, but it was like side scrolling, and I saw a character with a gun, and I saw a zombie and an ant, and I pressed a button, and then I somersaulted into the ant, and then I was dead, but not. I don't know. It was so strange, but I think it's sort of sort of adventure game maybe with FMVs.
This game is hard to talk about without discussing the Amiga version, the original, a little bit, and Cinemaware as a whole. Voltaire, have you ever played a Cinemaware game before this one?
You just mentioned some, and one did ring a
Defender
bell.
of the Crown.
Defender of the Crown. I think I played that as a kid on Amiga, but I think also it was really hard to understand when you're like like maybe I was 8 years old and I didn't know English very well.
And if you were playing the Amiga version, yeah, that doesn't help because that was a somewhat broken version of the game. But yeah, okay. Their games are always trying to replicate old movies. And It Came from the Desert was no different. The original version was replicating 1950s B-movie science fiction. Now, this version that's coming out several years later, or a couple of years later, was their first big foray into FMV. So the idea was using CD-ROM, they were going to do this big production. Unfortunately, Cinemaware is running out of cash. They didn't move to PCs fast enough. They were still using EGA. They fell behind the times. Their last big Amiga game, Wings, only appeared on the Amiga. Didn't even get a PC port. It comes out around the same time as Wing Commander. So they're way behind the curve, even though they were the ones who did the whole cinematic presentation thing back in 85, 86. And so they're trying to catch up. This game was originally supposed to be released on all sorts of platforms. But when they ran out of money, they took some money from NEC, the company that was making the PC Engine / TurboGrafx 16, and that's when this game becomes a TurboGrafx exclusive.
And that's maybe because of they're losing out on money. It also seems like a mess, this game. It's like I feel like it's not streamlined at all when I'm playing this. It's like, what's even happening? It feels like just snippets of video pasted together, and that's it.
Yeah, and from what I was able to see now in your gameplay, it really does feel like there's connective tissue missing, and that the technology or whatever they were planning to do with the technology may have had to be shrunk down to fit on essentially an 8-bit system. Because that's what the TurboGrafx-16 was.
Yeah, and it doesn't look pretty. It's confusing, and maybe I feel there. Yeah, I'm also always positive with these kinds of things. I feel maybe when you play it a little longer, maybe some mystery maybe will unfold, or is this known to be a really bad game?
This is known to be pretty much a dog, even though it gets relatively good reviews at the time.
Maybe because it's sort of new.
Yeah, I mean, the only other game that's using this much video that I can think of at the moment that was already out was Sherlock Holmes Consulting Detective. This is, I mean, it's still this brand new thing where it's like you've never seen people move around and talk and look human on a screen before. This is brand new. This is really, really cool.
Yeah, especially if you see Mortal Kombat got a review.
Mortal Kombat gets a review. Now, this game already had reviews in previous magazines in previous months.
Okay.
So it'd been out for maybe about 4 or 5 months at this point, at least. I just happened to find another review of it in another magazine, a belated review. So I was like, sure, let's throw it back on the list. It was a game that I really, really, really wanted to have as a 7 minutes in heaven at some point.
Yeah, it definitely looks interesting, and I think, yeah, maybe they were too far ahead of their time for. Yeah, the technology is just not there. Like this one speed CD-ROMs and the low color videos are just not pretty.
No, but they do an interesting thing with it, which is that it's not video in a small window like the Sherlock Holmes games were.
No, they embed it they make a pre-rendered background or a photo.
It's something. A photo background. Yeah, there's no 3D rendering in this game.
Yeah, so it's a photo. They paste it on top of a photo and sort of cut out like a blue screen or something.
Exactly.
So,
which is really kind of cool because it's really just one little box, but they're trying to frame the people into that box in a very creative way.
Yeah, I think if you play this on the CRT, maybe it can be sort of convincing, but yeah, also the perspectives weren't right. So there was like a guy sitting on a chair, and then the perspective of the background was a bit different. So
yeah.
So it wasn't really well done, but they at least they tried.
At least they tried, yeah. But I mean, for example, the guy who was in the truck and is leaning out of the truck, that was pretty well done. Yeah. I got to give him credit for that. That actually looked kind of cool.
They also looked a bit like 90s TV shows where they used a blue screen. It was a blue screen at that time. At least here.
Over in the States too. At this point, you're still doing blue screen. You haven't moved to green screen yet.
So they also, you have like sort of the same effects going on TV in the 90s.
Yeah.
And maybe it's like period correct, like
no, it still looked like crap back then. I remember seeing this running on a demo unit back in the day, and it looked like crap back then. But it was a thing that happened. So would you recommend this game to anybody based off of your time with it?
No, I would recommend watching the 7 Minutes in Heaven, and then and that's it. And maybe if you're still interested in what will happen, just go to YouTube and watch the rest, I guess. Just don't do it.
Don't do it. Okay. Well, then there you have it, people. Just don't do it. Is the recommendation from our intrepid co-host today. And with that being said, let's move on to the Department of Corrections, where our good friend Ethan is going to tell me everything that I got wrong in our August 1992 jump.
Hello, this is a prepaid collect call from
the Department of Corrections.
This call is subject to recording and monitoring. To accept charges, press 1. You may start the conversation now.
Welcome back, Ethan.
You woke me up.
Yeah, I know. You're one of those musician types, so you're always sleeping at weird hours. Okay.
Excuse me.
You've got work to do.
Fine.
Real work here. The kind you don't get paid for. So, before we can find out what I got wrong in August of 92, it's time for
hold on. Let me see here. The Voltaire comment. Yes, Voltaire. I just want to tell you, sir, I don't hate European games. I hate British games. Except for Rare. Rare gets the exception.
Oh, come on. Sensible Software. You had fun with WizKid, right?
If fun stands for something else, then possibly. But anyways, I will subject you to some devilish morning breakfast here at the Department of Corrections for August of 1992. Take a sip, Carl.
Okay, whatever you drugged it with, I'm game. Let's do this.
That is far too minuscule a punishment for you. Okay, into Street Fighter 2. You discussing the differences between the bootlegs and the legitimate versions of Street Fighter 2. You did forget to mention Rainbow Edition, which was the inspiration for Street Fighter 2 Turbo.
Okay, and which version was that?
It was, I think, originates in Hong Kong. I can't remember exactly, but basically they sped everything up. It was basically a speed-up kit version of Street Fighter 2. And that inspired them. It's like, oh, we should make the game faster by default.
That makes sense. I mean, it would not be unprecedented in the arcades to have a speed-up kit inspire an official sequel, if you will. And I think I also goofed up on that one. I think I said that Champion Edition was originally Hyper Fighting, and it's not. Hyper Fighting was Turbo, and the Champion Edition has a different name originally in Japan. And I'm blanking on it right now. So
I believe there you go. I don't remember exactly all of this, but I believe that there are a couple experts on Street Fighter 2 bootlegs because it was pretty prevalent, as you've kind of covered in the show. So seek out those resources if you can.
Oh yeah, tons and tons of bootlegs.
Next up, Street Fighter 2 is JAMA compatible. It does fit in a JAMA thing, but you need an extension because otherwise you can't have the 6 buttons. So it's not as simple as any JAMA cabinet. You need to add the extension.
Okay, now when you say an extension, are we just talking about the harness is different, or is it some kind of computer hardware extension?
I believe it's just a harness thing, but it is something where you as a location owner will have to take that into account.
Aha. Okay. So there may have been some kind of vague justification for selling it as a full cabinet originally.
I mean the original, but then when you get to Champion Edition, no. Not really.
Okay. Okay, so this was already for Street Fighter 2. Sorry. Yes. Okay. Cool.
Next is your statement, Pokemon, quote unquote, Pokemon is 9 years away. By no measure are you correct.
No.
It doesn't, like, you could make an argument, it didn't get big until the movie, but the movie came out before then, and so you're wrong.
Yeah, no, totally off. Should not have said 9 years. What is it, like 4 years, 5 years away from the Japanese launch?
Well, not that many. Yeah, 4 years from the Japanese launch, 96.
Yeah.
Then E3. E3 was a trade show. It was never a consumer event. They learned things from all the years at CES and whatnot, but it was never intended for normal people to be able to access.
Gotcha.
E3 was always a trade show. Well, until recently, but.
Until recently, yeah. And we'll see if they, well, how long has it been open to the public now?
2014, 2016. Actually, maybe sooner than that. So yeah, the majority of it's time. And when you're talking about people who get in, who count as industry, it's obviously a lot of press people as well. So it's not just the people who are there to make deals. They are using it as a promotional event, but the nature of E3 was entirely different before. I actually, in my article about hype culture, I kind of put the lines like, once Microsoft launched the Xbox in such a public way in New York City in 2001, then beyond that, people wanted to know this stuff, and that's when they started distributing, DVDs of what happened at E3 and, made a show out of it for normal people. But it was never intended that way. People like to say of these things that happened at E3, like the first E3, no, $2.99. It's like, nobody saw this. Just a bunch of press people in a room who didn't really understand anything. They were just there to see previews of games. So the nature of E3 changed over time, but it was a trade show and technically still remains a trade show, but, hasn't happened in a while.
Gotcha.
Next up, as you make your vaporware argument, the Giga Leak has less than you think. If you think that like every Nintendo first-party title has some significant from the SNES era has some significant dump on the Giga Leak, you're wrong about that. We have many gaps in terms of what actually came out on the Giga Leak. And it only pertains to Nintendo first-party titles as well. So I wouldn't use that as evidence as, they definitely weren't working on CD-ROM stuff. Because, secondarily, I do have to just preempt you there, Carl, as I hear you rattling around getting ready for this. We do know for a fact that several things were in active development for the CD-ROM, which includes Secret of Mana, which is, Seiken Densetsu 2, and Seventh Guest, which you've talked about.
Well, I know they licensed it. I mean, do we know now? And there is one bit of Super NES CD entertainment in the Giga Leak, which was information and some correspondence about Sony's demo reel. I think it was a game called Fortress or something along those lines, which was basically just a shooter game that was using streamed video as the backdrop for it. And but that was actually being developed for the PlayStation, so the Sony's Super NES PlayStation. And the fact that that's in there, but there's no other mention of CD titles so far, at least as far as I could find in the Giga Leak, that is still, I'm like, okay, where is this stuff? Or what do we know about the Seventh Guest? Because we know that they announced Seventh Guest had been licensed as a title for it at CES, but who was going to do the port? Do we know that?
I forget the specifics.
Okay. Because I'd love to find out how they were going to try to squeeze that on there, or how they were going to be streaming the video with a single speed device like that in that way. But, it would be interesting to see how far they got with that.
Yeah, I mean, I would like to know these things, but I still am pretty firm in the belief that they were working with something, even if they didn't have necessarily a dev kit. I mean, this happened the same thing happened with the N64. A lot of people weren't working with dev kits for a real long time until they got an actual official Nintendo dev kit.
This is true, but I mean, they had them more than 6 months before the launch.
Yeah, I'm not saying that.
And this is supposed to come out in January. And what we do know is that at CES, nobody had dev kits yet.
Nobody that they talk to. But that doesn't even really matter because, whether or not Nintendo marketing was being upfront about the state of the CD project in terms of when it was going to come out, which there's been a lot of stuff that has been actively developed and just never came out. I think that's kind of immaterial next to whether or not it existed. And I think it existed.
And I will believe it as soon as I actually see something concrete. But, okay, we will have to agree to disagree on this point. On this article of faith, if you will.
Next in Carl's terrible pronunciation, Kevin Balthaser. I think he said Balthazar.
Oh, Balthaser. Okay, that's cool.
He is still around. He's cool. Haven't talked to him. Alex has. And finally, this is pedantic, but I'm going to have to bring it up anyways. The continental U.S. has more than 4 time zones because of daylight saving time.
Because of daylight savings time.
Yes, there are some places that observe it and some places that don't. Therefore, it is a different time zone.
Really? Who doesn't observe daylight savings time?
So I think 3 states. Arizona is one of them. I know that.
That makes sense. Yeah.
And yeah,
let me guess. They're all red states.
Well, I don't know that, but I don't know what that would really have to do with that. But regardless, U.S. technically has more than 4 contiguous time zones.
That is an awesome piece of trivia I did not know, but I do relish. Thank you very much.
So,
hey, the small
August 1992, you can finally leave. I can go back to my nap.
Yeah, you have my permission to go back to your nap.
Oh, excuse.
Sleep tight, sweet prince, and until the next time.
So, have you ever looked into the Giga Leak yourself, Carl?
I haven't looked into the files. I have spent a tremendous amount of time in the forums about it. Like just the other day, a couple days before we recorded, somebody finally got the editing software up and running that was used to make 3D models and textures for Star Fox. So that software is up and running. You can go in and edit the textures for Star Fox now if you wanted to, and the 3D models.
So do you the Giga Leak? Over how many years of data is that? Is it like?
Oh, it goes. As far as I can tell, it goes back. I mean, they've got prototype stuff for Mario, so it's whatever at whatever point they started storing stuff on servers there. That's probably as far back as it goes.
If I remember, it's like an SVN versioning control thingy which they downloaded, right? That's a Giga Leak. I clicked through it a bit, especially that old stuff. I've seen that old Yoshi. How he looked before he looks like now, and also I got some old Star Fox pictures which are hilarious. It really looks wrong, but I can't remember. I can only remember like the pre-16-bit era, but I can't remember like the end of this SNES era in the Giga Leak. But
well, I'd have to look again. I'm not sure how much N64 stuff is in there and how much stuff afterwards. Like I said, I've been perusing the forums that are talking about it primarily as topics come up.
So we just have to wait if that CD-ROM, if there's any proof of that CD-ROM add-on,
there's none.
It should be in there, and until it's not, there's no proof, then we just say it's not there.
let me just put, I had a brief conversation with the co-designer of The Seventh Guest over Twitter, and he did in fact confirm that Nintendo just secured the license to The Seventh Guest in order to keep it out of Sega's hands. That was it. And as far as he knows, no development work was ever done on that. The publisher, actually, Virgin, went back and bought back the rights so they could release the CDI version and other versions of the game. And he even had Shigeru Miyamoto over at his house for a barbecue. And Miyamoto just kept talking about how great cartridges were because little kids could hold them in their hands and how important cartridges were for Nintendo. So, yeah, definitely not the conversation of somebody who's interested in making CD games.
No. And if they were big in CDs, they probably never released the N64 this way.
Exactly. The N64 is the proof that their intent to move to CD was never genuine. Granted, CD-ROM in this generation, as we just saw with it, it came from the desert, and with many, many of the Sega CD games that will be coming out, and you may have the pleasure of playing something like Make Your Own Video Crisscross. But I don't know if I'll do that to anybody. That's just torture beyond torture. But it's not really a ready technology yet. It has so limited uses at this point. Not that it couldn't be used for good things, and there are
maybe
some
just
good
CD audio.
A CD audio, or you add, speech to cutscenes. The CD-ROM version of Wing Commander or The Secret of Monkey Island for the Sega CD. I mean, those take those attributes of the CD medium and use them appropriately, but there's really not a lot of reasons to go CD for the full motion video or anything like that.
Yeah,
so,
maybe like anime would work. I played Rondo of Blood, the PC Engine CD game, and they have bits of anime in there, and that looked pretty okay, actually.
Yeah, and this is why. I mean, you can do it for some of the cutscenes. It makes sense for if used appropriately. But incorporating it into the gameplay is a very iffy thing. According to the Giga Leak, Sony had worked out a demo game. It was a scrolling shooter that was using FMV streaming video as the background. So you'd have sprites on the foreground, which was the actual game, but the background was this scrolling digitized imagery.
Like this Laserdisc games.
Well, the Laserdisc games were more, there were a couple of shooter games, but something like Microcosm, but in a 2D plane, or Sony also did this with their version of Dracula, based off the Francis Ford Coppola movie. If you play Dracula for the Mega CD, that's exactly what it is. It's a side-scrolling game, little jump and run action game. It's absolutely terrible. But the backdrops actually look like the movie sets, and you're sort of scrolling across the movie sets as your digitized character in the foreground is jumping over pits and stuff. It doesn't work at all, but the idea that you didn't have to have these flat sprite-based or tile-based backgrounds was kind of, in the air of, what do we do now that we can stream this digitized imagery?
Interesting that they never developed a game. There's never a game developed with this, but in modern times.
Well, I mean, nowadays you would just have a 3D model in the background that would be rendered.
Of course, but maybe real video footage could still be an interesting thing.
Well, you can still do. There are retro style FMV games being made today. There's a game on Steam called Press Red to Live or something, or Press Red Not to Die. I'm probably getting the name wrong. I'll put a link to it in the show notes, which I absolutely adored when I played it. I mean, I got it for like $2 in a Steam sale. It was definitely worth those $2, where it's this first person view of this guy running around and all these terrible things are happening in the city, and you little QuickTime events, and it's really, really just tongue-in-cheek. They know what they're making, and it's very fun to play in that sense. Or, you get other games like, Her Story.
Yeah, I played that. That's a great game. And there's there's a follow-up of that game. I still want to play that as well. It's supposed to be really good.
And this is the thing. There's things you can do with that technology, but the moment you try to meld digitized footage, especially when it's grainy with a lot of artifacts, together with sprites laid over it, you get what you were describing with the perspective problems and things like that that are hard to solve. Now, there's going to be a few games that actually get that down pretty right, and we will be talking about one of them is hitting the arcades this month. But, okay, enough about that. We need to turn on the time machine and head back to September of 1992.
Sega CD. 1992. Joystick to a whole new world.
Welcome to September of 1992. Wouter, what's our first story?
Japanese toy giants enter co-op. Nog een keer. Again.
One more time. From the
Japanese toy giants enter coinop biz.
With video games accounting for nearly half of all toy retail sales in Japan, it comes as no surprise that two of the country's biggest toy makers, Takara and Bandai, have both entered the coinop biz. Both companies have purchased arcades and are installing coinop machines in toy stores, including both video and redemption devices.
So they're just buying those coinop machines for in their stores, or are they also into making the games?
Well, I'm not sure if they're making the games. Now, this is coming from an article in Playmeter magazine. So it is. I know that both of them have licensed their characters for the use in coin-op games prior to this. And I know they also, at least Bandai is also making home video games. But now, as far as the article is concerned, they're just getting into the arcades and buying machines and setting them up in the stores. So I don't think they're making the games yet. The coin-op games, they're basically functioning as operators.
Because Bandai is now, I think, one of the biggest publishers in the gaming.
Yeah, Bandai has been in game publishing for a while. Like I said, they've been making home games for a while. But coin-op is a different beast, just because it requires you not only to make software but also to make hardware.
True.
And it requires it, and it's very different scale. So you're not, selling hundreds of thousands of units right off the get-go. You're selling maybe a few thousand units that are selling for much larger amounts. It's a very different business, but it's interesting that they're starting to get into this at this point, and that they're using their storefronts as place to set up the machines.
Yeah, that's interesting, because in the toy store, is it for like a sort of commercial for their toy lines, or is it like making actual money off the machines?
That is a good question. I think it's both. I think it's a way of attracting people into the store, keeping them in the store longer, as well as, just, hey, let's make some more money, similar to the way coin-op games were used to make more money in convenience stores in the U.S. or supermarkets 10 years earlier. And just to give an idea of how big the video game market in Japan is, there's one source that claims that over 500 console games were released in Japan the previous year.
Wow, that's a lot.
Yeah. Now, that may also be including computer games. That wasn't quite clear. But either way, it's a lot of games. Now, remember, Japan doesn't have the same restrictions that the U.S. had on number of cartridges that they could produce every year.
Yeah, because 500 games is really overwhelming. I actually have the same thing nowadays with all those indie games releasing on Steam. And
oh yeah,
even when you buy, you can now buy bundles of 1,000 games for €5, and then you have to choose what to play, and then you think, well, I just played nothing, you know?
Yeah, I think last year or so I bought an itch.io bundle at some point that had like 150 games in it. I mean, I've played like 2 of them. And yeah, I don't even want to know how many games are in my Steam Steam queue that I've bought through Humble Bundle and everything else. It's just crazy.
But 500 games, yeah. I wonder how they found quality in those.
Well, I mean, 500 games seems like a lot, but if you look at an average issue of GamePro magazine, there's at least 25 games reviewed every month, and those are just U.S. released console and handheld games.
Yeah, so you're also closing up to that number. Yeah.
You're getting close to that number, especially if you add computers into it. And then if you start thinking, for example, in Europe, it's much greater number because the home computer game releases are so numerous every month.
Yeah.
And
they're way shorter development time.
Also, you know, basically quality control. You know, they're not making sure every level plays just right and stuff. But that also has to do with the fact that, you know, the games are going to be on the shelf. Really are only going to have a shelf life for a couple of weeks, maybe a month or two in the majority of cases before they're going to be replaced with new games. So it's this constant churn of output.
That's true. Yeah.
Yeah, and there's also the piracy issue, which also reduces the longevity of the games on the stand. But and if you're doing a console game, the investment in creating the cartridges and everything is immense. Whereas there are stories from especially England where, you know, batch of cassette games didn't sell, so they just put new labels on them, re-recorded, sent them out with a new game. You can't do that with cartridges.
Yeah, you probably can recycle them. You can. Yeah, you only have to replace the ROM chip probably.
Yeah, but
that's a lot of work. That's a lot of work.
It up, it's a huge amount of work. Yeah, it's not happening.
That's true. But, okay, let's continue on to pinball. Adams Family Pinball Sets record.
Williams Bally Midway announced that their Adams Family pinball table has broken the record for most sold tables of modern flipper pinball, defeating Bally's own 1977 8-ball table. The table would get a special celebratory edition and end up racking up 20,270 machines being produced.
I feel I played this machine several times as a kid, but also maybe more recently. I think that this is still a machine you see a lot, a table.
Oh, yeah. I mean, it's the most produced one of all time. I mean, it's still a fairly common machine now 30 years later, just because of the number of units that were sold and the fact that the Addams Family movie theme was very popular because, well, it was the Addams Family just hit huge.
I recently visited my neighbor who has two pinball machines in his really small shed. And was really cool. He actually owns like 5 or 6 old pinball tables, and but he borrowed them out because he doesn't have room for them. But it's really cool to play them again in real life. It's been a while.
Yeah, I wish I had a place here nearby where I could actually play, but there's really no physical pinball table here in town. There's always one set up at the airport near me, but that's like a 20-minute drive, and I'm not going to do that just to play a couple rounds of pinball.
Yeah, for me it's like now it's 20 meters or something. It's there's 2 of them next to me, and he said, do you want to borrow one too? To me, and I said, I don't know. I don't want to get that wife angry.
What machines does he have set up?
High Speed and Dr. Who.
Oh, very nice tables. Which Doctor Who table? Is it the more modern one, very bluish look, or
blue with yellow stripes on it?
Yeah,
Time streams.
That's the more modern one. There's also a Doctor Who one from the early '80s, I want to say.
It's really fun, and it was really tempting to accept his offer to borrow one, but I have no idea where to set up that in my house. Maybe also have to clear out my shed and put it in there. But we'll see. Maybe it will happen.
Okay, the Doctor Who table, it was from 1992, the one I was thinking of. Okay, so not early 80s, early 90s. But
it's
definitely
Family.
Not the blue one. It's all yellows.
Mm-hmm. So. Really cool. Well, let's go on with more CoinUp. CoinUp Industry investigates the future.
Oh, yes. The Amusement and Music Operators Association, the trade group representing coin-op operators, has put together a new committee, the Advanced Technologies Committee, to investigate new technologies such as fiber optic lines, satellite TV, and CD-ROM storage to see how they may impact existing coin-op technology and how to make sure that operators can continue to profit from jukeboxes, arcade games, and other on-site entertainment.
Yeah, I think we talked about it last month for the last month's episode as well.
Yeah.
But they're really afraid, like sort of the proto-internet is capitalizing on their goods.
Oh yeah, definitely. I mean, this is one of these moments in time when there's so much happening at the same time, and they're very, very worried that they're simply going to be muscled out of the market. There's simply not going to be a reason to have them. And with jukeboxes, we will sort of see a variation of this. If you've seen a jukebox lately, it's typically just this box hanging on a wall with an internet connection, and there's certain songs that are already downloaded. You can pay extra to get additional songs, and it plays. Now, those are probably still run by an operator of some kind, but obviously they now require that there's this internet connection, that there's built-in infrastructure in the location that isn't directly under the control of the operator. And the idea that all of this stuff is coming from some digital service is, in addition to that, reducing the reliance on the operator to buy new discs to put in it and so forth. So, what is the operator's function in that setup is going to change.
Yeah, a lot less physical, probably.
A lot less physical, a lot less, the operator needs to know which are the really cool discs to put in this, jukebox that can only fit 40 discs or something. If you have the entire catalog of everything available to you, the operator doesn't really need to know that much about the content anymore. It changes their role.
They're more like a service than like someone who knows about this.
They're
trade.
A gatekeeper function for the content changes.
Yeah.
And so that's just one example, but they're really worried about all these other things, trivia nights and karaoke and so forth can all suddenly be done over network systems, or will be done over network systems within the next 15, 20 years. And it's interesting to see that they're really forward looking in many aspects right here and trying to get ahead of it, trying to see, okay, what's coming that could impact us.
Sadly, it didn't really work. If you look at the state of arcades right nowadays, it's not great.
It's not great, but at the same time, remember, CoinUp, in the long, long history of CoinUp, video games are just a relatively small blip. If you think of, all the crane games that you still, at least in North America, that you see all over the place. The gambling games that were always the bread and butter in Europe.
And also the ticket games, like where you get a lot of tickets out of it.
And maybe games. Yeah, all of those were there before video games, and they survive after video games. So, I mean, from our point of view as video game players, it seems like it's dead, but there's still a lot of operators out there. They're still functioning. It's just that the market has evolved. The market has changed. Kiddie rides are still a thing too. And also a lot of these operators are in slightly other businesses. I mean, most of them didn't mix and match, but for example, coin operated, or nowadays bill operated machines that sell you drinks and stuff. Also an operator business. So there's still a lot of this type of operation going on. It's just it's changing, and they want to make sure they're on the cutting edge, which is cool.
Yeah, and yeah, that's true. Yeah.
Speaking of cutting edge. Wow.
And operators being worried. Operators worried about violence in games.
In a world where, sorry, I should say this in the right voice. In a world where, in a world where beat 'em ups have ruled the arcades for years, and now one-on-one fighting games are on the rise, with Street Fighter ruling the roost and new games like Mortal Kombat, Art of Fighting, World Heroes, and more being released, some arcade operators are growing wary of what these games mean for their business, which is relying more and more on family-friendly redemption machines. Will violent arcade cabinets deter families from coming into the arcades? Will they lose the teenagers if they don't have the latest violence-ridden titles? What about a new wave of anti-coinop hysteria? The letters page of this month's replay highlights such concerns.
Yeah, I think it's all about who is the target audience of your arcade, I think.
Yes and no, because you're trying to cater to the whole family. Remember, it's, if little Tommy the 5-year-old wants to play on the skee ball, but the 12-year-old wants to go and play some video games, but the video games are not interesting, then you no longer have a family. You're no longer covering the entire spectrum. Yeah,
but you can maybe make a family-friendly arcade and maybe more like a nighttime arcade or something. Maybe diversify in types of arcade.
And this is the problem, that you'd have to either move the machines out during a certain time or have two separate buildings. But now basically what you've just done is you've doubled your fixed cost but halved your income.
Yeah.
And that doesn't really work. So a lot of these guys a lot of them are being spooked because they'll remember the anti-game hysteria from the early 80s. And they're afraid it's going to come back in a new form. And they're also just worried that they need the teenagers to come in and play games. They need that coin drop, because the teenagers are the ones who are going to play the same game for 10 rounds in a row.
And they probably also have a little bit more money.
Exactly. You can't run these family fun centers or arcades without the teenagers. But at the same time, and we've talked about this before for the last year or so, redemption has really been on the rise. That is the big active area, because games in the home have gotten so good and the adoption is so widespread. It's harder and harder to get people to come to the arcade to see something new and spectacular. And the redemption thing with the family entertainment center concept has just exploded, gotten more and more powerful. So it is a valid concern from these operators. Are we, hurting ourselves by still pursuing this one? Can we make enough money off of going to the other? And one of the letters actually suggests, why isn't the AMOA, the Operators Association, talking to the AAMA, which is the Manufacturers Association, and trying to come to some kind of agreement, on levels of violence, and basically making sure that there's enough product in the pipeline, or that at least the product that's in the pipeline isn't so excessive.
But that's like changing what will be in what will be available. But couldn't they just like make a corner in the arcade for the violent stuff, and
because then it's just going to be tempting, and people are still going to want to come in and play it. Also, you don't want the teenagers stuck in a corner someplace away from the lights and what everybody else, and where you can monitor what they're doing. You really don't want that.
I think there should be solutions, and I wonder how arcades really fix this problem. If there's arcades which just didn't have Mortal Kombat, for example.
And that's exactly what ends up happening. I don't want to say it with 100% certainty, but I know a lot of places like the Chuck E. Cheese's of this world just didn't have those games.
And how did that affect them?
Well, they lived off of big advertising. It was all about kids' birthday parties and stuff like that. And they went full-blown into redemption machines around.
Yeah, so there's not... Yeah, so then you still have the diversified types of arcades.
Yeah, but
happening.
Remember, Chuck E. Cheese also has all the additional entertainment with people in costumes and all this other stuff.
That's true, yeah.
Which the average mom and pop operator just can't afford to do that. In the arcade the Family Fun Center that I worked in, now a couple of years later in 95, but in Seattle Funplex, the way that they solved it was simply there was one side of the building with all the arcade games. They did not shy away from having them in quite prominent locations, but they also had this giant extra space with the laser tag and the batting cages and the mini golf, and the redemption devices were also separated from that, so that if the little kids didn't want to go to the big floor where the arcade cabinets were, they didn't have to see it. But at a certain point, you just kind of had to accept, okay, this is going to happen, and we're moving on. And this is just the way these games are, and the people who are going to get angry about it are going to get angry about it.
Yeah, but it's also like the parents, if there are little kids, probably the parents are there too, so they also have a saying in this probably.
Exactly. But this is the fun part. While we've talked a little bit about some people attempting restrictions on access to the arcades at this point, they're going to be far and few between. The big anger is going to come because these games are going to come home. So actually, the arcades are going to luck out because they're no longer the big headline. They're no longer the focus of media attention like they were in 82. Instead, in 92, the focus is on the console games, and the real scare about violence in gaming is not going to erupt until Mortal Kombat gets ported to the home systems.
Yeah, so...
And by then the arcade game is already old. There's going to be sequels, but the fact that little Johnny wants this for Christmas, and mommy has to shell out $70 or $60 or whatever to bring the violence home is going to be what gets people outraged, and there's going to be congressional hearings, and that's going to be fun stuff for next year.
Yeah, and I also think like the arcade machines are maybe too physically big for kids to play, like small kids.
Oh, no. If you're in one of these arcades back then, they actually have these stepping stools so the kids can reach.
Yeah, but you just don't supply the stepping stools for the Mortal Kombat machine.
No. You don't want that because the stepping stools also give them access to the old Miss Pac-Man machine in the corner or whatever else is out there.
Okay.
So no. The stepping stools were always part of the arcade. And I mean, yeah, okay, maybe that will be a problem for the 5 or 6 year old, but you're still talking maybe a 10-year-old, pulling off Sub-Zero's rip people's head off with their spinal cord move. So
yeah, I played that when I was 10, I think.
Exactly. And you turned out perfectly normal. Okay. Let's move on.
Yeah,
There's tons of stuff left to cover.
Street Fighter Mania comes home.
Oh, yes. Speaking of the home, with the launch in North America of Street Fighter II on the Super NES, the arcade craze has come home. But while many are running out to buy Nintendo's 16-bit machine to get in on the beat-em-up action, many others are wondering if the game will quickly be replaced by an updated Championship Edition cart in just a few months, making their $80 investment obsolete.
Yeah, that's always a question with Street Fighter releases, if there's not some kind of crazy different version around the corner.
And that's the thing. I mean, this is coming out. We talked already about how Championship Edition is already out in the arcades and has been for a few months. And, $80. Street Fighter 2 on the Super Nintendo was the largest cart, memory-wise, that had been released up to that point. It was a very expensive cart. And
still sold like hotcakes, probably.
Well, sold like hotcakes. People were buying the Super Nintendo just to play this.
Mm-hmm.
And it was exclusive to the Super Nintendo. There's no other system, not even PC ports. So if you wanted to play Street Fighter 2, this was your only option. But people are, and this is showing up in the letters pages of the magazines, that people are just like, what happens if Championship Edition comes out? And there's this huge deal about a cheat code that would allow you to play the same character against one another, which was one of the options in the Championship Edition. And so this is a huge deal that, maybe I don't have to buy Championship Edition because, I can already play Ken versus Ken or whatever.
That's true, right?
There was a cheat code that could activate it in the cartridge. Now, the other thing that is not in the cartridge is playable versions of the boss characters.
No,
so the 4 boss characters are still not playable, but at least it's closer.
I think there was the regular version, and I think the next one is the Turbo, I think.
On the Super Nintendo, yes, but not on all consoles.
Well, that's the next story, I guess.
Exactly.
Capcom goes Sega.
Capcom of Japan has announced that they will be developing games for Sega's Genesis and Mega CD. The first games to get ported to the systems will be Final Fight to the Mega CD, becoming a complete arcade-like package, as close as possible, as opposed to the very neutered Super NES ports. Strider is also apparently in development for the CD unit, but will ultimately appear on cartridge. Capcom Japan denies rumors of a Sega port of Street Fighter II Champion Edition.
Yeah, I remember. I think Final Fight only has 2 playable characters or something on the Super Nintendo, and you can do multiplayer. Is that?
And it's only single player. Yeah. So, and also a lot of the graphics have been changed or removed, and it's a very neutered version of the game.
Yeah, it's.
And then in Japan they released Final Fight Guy, which replaced, I think, so the original 2 that you could play on the Super NES was Cody and Hagar. They replaced Cody with Guy, so you still could only have 2 available characters, and this was all down to ROM size.
Crazy that they didn't release like a newer version with all the characters.
Well, the Super Nintendo is going to get 2 Final Fight sequels, Final Fight 2 and Final Fight 3, which will solve that gameplay problem by adding even more characters and will be 2 players. But they're also going to, if memory serves me right, the sprites get much smaller.
And the Mega CD version is more like the arcade. I don't know that version.
Yeah, it's much, much closer to the arcade. I mean, the real purist will find little things to nitpick, but it was as close to an arcade-perfect version as you were going to get.
Yeah, just like Strider. I think I played the arcade version, and after that the Mega Drive version, and I think, there are differences, but still.
But they're minimal. They're
pretty faithful to the arcade version, I think.
Oh, yeah. And this is going to be the beginning of Capcom releasing games for Sega. Now, anybody who has listened to my interview with Joe Morici, who was one of the top guys at Capcom USA, there was a Street Fighter II Champion Edition in development for the Genesis. That does get scrapped because it wasn't quite up to snuff, and he had actually said, just release it, it's good enough. And then they did a whole new development of the game, which does get released as Street Fighter II Champion Edition on the Genesis. For that story, check out my interview with him. It's quite entertaining because, Capcom USA is really pushing to get on the Sega platforms fairly early on. Capcom of Japan is a little bit more reluctant to do it, but then they do sign up to do it. And they're not the only ones. There's also Tecmo. They've licensed some of their properties, including Ninja Gaiden, to Sega in Japan. So Sega of Japan is going to be porting the NES game Ninja Gaiden to the Genesis, or I think they even released it as like a trilogy cart or something like that. I don't remember the details.
And also have a Game Gear version of Ninja Gaiden.
Yes, the Game Gear is also going to get a version of Ninja Gaiden, and it just keeps going from there. Now, interesting note here also, there's a port of the arcade game Ninja Gaiden, which has nothing to do with the console versions, for the Lynx, which is just an interesting little side note. So Tecmo was always sort of, they like to license their stuff out a little bit more. And one more little thing here, just there is a project going on right now. It's an indie project where a group is porting or trying to make an arcade perfect port of Final Fight for the Genesis. So I'll put a link to some of the news stories about that from Indie Retro News in the show notes. Sorry, you were about to say.
Yeah, it's always interesting that I think Sega, coming from the arcade, always wanted to have the really arcade perfect games on there, and probably at the time that was really like a big thing as well. But nowadays I really gravitate more like to the Super Nintendo because they made games specifically for home play, and somehow I really love like the home experience games way more than games which are actually meant for the arcade.
Well, of course, yeah.
Yeah, so I think maybe I'll get a lot of people angry about it, but
no, I mean,
I just don't really love all those arcade ports on the Sega, and that's why I don't have a lot of feeling with the Sega machine. And they still have unique games for home, but yeah, there's a lot more weight on those arcade conversions, I think.
Well, Sega's own output was very coin-op heavy. And Nintendo, I mean, we just talked about how Nintendo has completely left the arcade business now, even though in reality they'd been out for quite a while, out of making coin-op unique games.
Mm-hmm.
But the problem is a coin-op game is supposed to be fun for very small bursts. It's supposed to inspire you to throw in another quarter, but what is inherent in that design is you have a limited number of quarters in your pocket. It's that decision as the countdown is going, and like in Final Fight, you see a picture of your character tied up with dynamite, and he's blowing on the dynamite as the countdown is going, and the character's about to die. Are you going to save him and keep going and try to get a little bit further in the game? That moment in the arcade, with all the noise of the arcade going on around you, and you got 4 more quarters in your pocket. Do you throw another one in or not? That cannot be replicated in the home version. So
then you have like limited lives, but yeah, then you don't have the decision. Can I continue on or not? It's just like the game decides for you that, okay, it's game over. That's it.
You need to somehow reinvent the game mechanic to work. Now, Street Fighter 2 is a great example where it does translate well because of the competitive aspect. Because there's so much to do to learn how to use the character and get really good with each of the characters and so on and so forth, that it has that replay value, and especially when you play with friends. But a more linear game like Final Fight or Golden Axe or whatever loses a lot when you don't have that experience. And for players of that time, so somebody like me who played a lot of games in the arcade and then would play the same game on my home computers, the the experience, I could sort of transpose my memory of the coin experience from the arcade onto that moment of do I continue or do I not continue on the home version.
Yeah, and also maybe you can find new things in the game you never seen in the arcade version because you couldn't pay for it or something.
Exactly.
So that's maybe exciting. But there's more in this game. But nowadays, when you go back to those machines, and even I on my Mister, I can play like the Neo Geo games. They look beautiful, but honestly, they don't interest me a lot. Maybe for like an arcade experience, so like for 5 minutes or something, but. After that, then I think, okay, I've seen this, and let's continue on with something else, or more like grander adventure or something.
Well, and that's the thing. That's what they're designed to do, and there's nothing wrong with it.
No, but if you go back nowadays,
understand that that's all they're designed to give.
Yeah, true. Yeah, and I understand that, but
I know.
I'm not going to sit down and play those games for like an hour or something, or 2 hours.
And that's perfectly okay. And this is what makes, the modern thing of having 1,000 games on MAME, and you just hit the random button and you start playing a random arcade game, is kind of cool, because that's close to the experience of walking into an arcade where you might recognize a handful of the games, but then there's suddenly 2 or 3 games in the corner you've never seen before. And that excitement of popping in a quarter and just trying to figure out what's going on and looking at the graphics. And that's cool. But it's also not necessarily a game that you're going to play for 5 hours. It's a game that you're going to play for a few minutes. You experience something new, you move on.
Yeah, but you still pay like $40 for like a cartridge back then.
Well,
to play.
You paid a lot of money for the carts if you bought it for the home, but then
for a 10 minutes experience.
And that's the thing. You're basically buying the replication of that. And we've talked about it on the show before, but the print ad campaign for Final Fight on the Super Nintendo was this photo of these little kids, probably 10, 11 years old, and it looks like they've just broken into an arcade. They're walking out of the back door of the arcade with a Final Fight cabinet on their backs, and they're looking straight at you like you just caught them doing something they weren't supposed to do. And the tagline was something along the lines of, there's a better way to get the arcade experience at home, and buy Final Fight on the Super NES. So especially considering how neutered the version was. It's kind of, out
ridiculous,
there.
Yeah.
But that's what the appeal of these home ports was. That you had this game in the arcade. You were never probably going to see the end of it if you had to play it quarter at a time. But now you could bring this really cool, high-tech, awesome graphics game home, and that's what made it appealing. Sometimes the games, got massive overhauls, like Ninja Gaiden got a massive overhaul. Contra on the NES feels very different from Contra in the arcade. So you could reinvent the game a little bit. But then...
Yeah, I feel that's if you look back to it, that was the right way to go. But I maybe a lot of people would be disappointed when the game is so different from the arcade if you buy it.
Exactly.
So it goes 2 ways. But nowadays you think, okay, I'd rather play that more grander adventure for catered for home play instead of the arcade game.
And that's where, if you don't have the nostalgia for the arcade, a lot of those games will have a hard time of putting their hooks into you nowadays, unfortunately.
Yeah.
But yeah, just the way it is. Okay, let's move on. Too many stories still to cover.
about something which not in the arcade. Nintendo announces the Super FX chip.
Nintendo will be incorporating a new 3D processing chip into games to enhance the abilities of their 16-bit system. They promise to be able to do texture mapping, shading, and real-time 3D. The first title should be hitting shelves in February.
I don't remember texture mapping, but I do remember Star Fox a lot. Oh yeah, they actually have textures on there.
Yeah.
Not many, but there's a couple. Yeah. I vividly remember Star Fox. It was really like, when I saw that, I was like, wow, this is something else.
It was something else for console gamers.
Yeah, and
PC gamers obviously were, used to better, but
really, what?
Wing Commander is already 2 years old at this point.
I was coming from the Amiga, but probably.
Well, even on the Amiga, I mean, you didn't have too many games.
I had that race game. Stunt Car Racer.
There were a lot of 3D games. Most of them kind of janky in their 3D, but
also really slow frame rate. But Star Fox is not great either.
Star Fox is hard to play nowadays. I'm sorry, but that frame rate is pretty bad.
I tried not long ago, and But there's improvement patches if somebody is interested. But
I know, and also just recently, part of the Giga Leak was that they also got the editing tools for creating 3D models and textures in the game.
That's cool. So maybe they can expand the game a bit.
Well, there's people already working on using those tools to do all sorts of new stuff with Star Fox.
Oh, that's great.
Those tools are now available. But the Star Fox is not really the thing they're talking about yet. There is some speculation, and it's pure speculation, that this might become the coprocessor in the fabled Super NES CD-ROM drive.
That one again.
Yeah, exactly. yeah. The vaporware. So the first game, Star Fox, would hit shelves in Japan in February of 93, and later on in October in North America. So we're still several months away from this becoming a reality, but so basically a little more than a year before it hits North America, and even longer before it hits Europe.
Probably I got it in 94 or something.
Yeah.
So I still love that game, and Nintendo should make a new one.
There's a lot of good reasons to keep that franchise alive, and just finding the right way to, I think, update it is probably going to be the most difficult part.
Yeah, they didn't, I think after Star Fox 64, they messed up a lot. I think there's maybe good ideas in the other games, but it never got to a high point or something.
Well, I think the big problem with the game is that it lives very much off of its technology wow factor, but it suffers from some of the same design problems that games like Space Harrier suffered from.
Yeah, it's basically sort of a shmup. So
it's a shmup, but it's also a shmup where your character is constantly in the way.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that makes a lot of the quick action and reaction difficult. Some games have managed to work around this. Buck Rogers in the Planet of Zoom, the old Sega arcade game, did it by basically just putting your ship at the bottom of the screen, so that you always saw what was coming at you, messing with the horizon. But that also limited your movement on the screen.
Yeah, it's more about shooting than dodging, I think.
I mean, it's
aiming. You aim a lot, but not dodge a lot. You can dodge bullets, but it's sometimes hard to see what's hitting you and what's not. But Panzer Dragoons also has that problem, and also doesn't have a new release. So.
Panzer Dragoon is another series that would be difficult to update because you had those 90-degree turns and where you're shooting, which could just be they got very, very difficult to manage. And I think that if you're going to do this kind of action-y game, you'd really have to adapt it to open 3D worlds.
Or
did it fairly well back in the day.
Or VR.
If you did it in VR, it would be interesting. This is why I always keep saying, an update of Dragon Strike would be a good way to approach this. But then it becomes more of a flight sim perspective. It's just, you'd probably also have to flesh out the Star Fox world a little bit more. And I just, there's probably just a spin on it or an adaptation of the gameplay that somebody's going to have to crack at some point to really make it work. And I just don't think somebody's cracked it yet.
And I also don't think Nintendo wants to bother with it.
Oh, Nintendo never leaves anything truly behind. This is why.
Well, F-Zero.
Fox McCloud still shows up in the Smash Brothers games.
Yeah, that's true, but yeah.
So
for me,
it'll show up again. Okay,
let's
moving
hope.
on.
Okay, Sega keeps improving lockout tech.
Sega has continued its fight against gray importers and unlicensed cart makers through revisions of its motherboards. It has finally added a lockout chip to prevent gray imports. Electronic Gaming Monthly reports that they have found the first Japanese cart to not work with a US Genesis, Super Monaco GP2, which gives a warning message, quote, "This cartridge has been developed for use outside North and South America, except Argentina, Paraguay, and Uruguay. It cannot be used with hardware units for sale within these areas," end quote.
Yeah, that's they tried, but they probably it was only for a short while.
Well, no, actually, this is going to work. I mean, you can mod the devices, obviously, but this was also an answer to the problem that they had with the Accolade games, where Accolade countersued because the original mean message that they had inserted was, this is a product of Sega. And Accolade had sued saying, no. Sega had nothing to do with our unlicensed games. So there's trying to do this. I thought the exclusion of Argentina, Paraguay, and Uruguay was interesting because those are the three markets in South America at this point that are really viable markets for them, that other than Brazil, but Tectoy has that. And so the fact that they're importing games into these three territories that were actually developed either for Europe or Japan seems interesting. And I'd love to know more about what the actual status of these imports were at this time, because I was already out of Argentina by this point. But it would be interesting to see, what the official distribution of Sega product in those territories was at this point in time.
So they imported from Europe as well, because they have the different the 50 hertz?
Well, South America uses PAL. They don't use NTSC.
Ah, okay.
NTSC is just Japan and North America, which is weird because, South America is using PAL. Now, there's slight differences. There's PAL B and PAL N. South America uses PAL, but they have a slight variation of the PAL from what's in Europe. But, for example, you could play a European video cassette in a South American player without a problem.
Okay.
And Brazil has its own variation on PAL, and I don't know how incompatible that is. So it's NTSC is really Japan and North America. And I don't even know what Mexico uses. I don't know if Mexico is PAL or NTSC. That I'd have to look up. So it's just weird that they're doing it this way, but it is trying to solve the Accolade problem and also at the same time try to prevent the gray imports so they have more control over software distribution.
But that's only on newer models of the Mega Drive, and not if you still have an old Mega Drive, then you can still run everything.
Oh, no. So the new cartridges. You can run all the old cartridges, but you can't run the new cartridges.
Oh, it's a cartridge lockout.
See, yeah, now the cartridges are looking for that. So they're identifying, do you have the right chip? So there's something that they're doing, and I'm not sure if it's, it's revision of the motherboard, but at the same time, software of some kind. So obviously you're going to be able to hack it. That's without a doubt. But this is just the latest revision that is going to prevent the gray importing.
Okay.
Yeah, fun stuff.
Yeah, let's continue on. Riddle software?
I think it's Riddle.
Riddle Software Productions gets Donkey Kong license.
Philips' acquisition of Nintendo licenses for their CDI player seems to be bearing fruit, with Riddle Software Productions, the company led by Mike Riddle of Spy vs. Spy fame, having gotten the contract to design and develop a Donkey Kong-based game for the CDI. Will it bring the multimedia wonders to the arcade classic?
I can't remember Donkey Kong for CDI.
No, never happened. Now, Riddle Software is an interesting company. Like I said, Mike Riddle did the original Spy vs. Spy game back on the Atari 8-bit and C64. Stone Cold classic, amazing game even to this day. But his Riddle Software company just does a lot of crap, unfortunately. It's mostly licensed titles like, cartoon licenses or whatever else. Not really super high quality, but they had a reputation for, we can take a license and make a game and get it done, and they actually produce software as opposed to a lot of cool developers that, didn't get the job done.
Is this a US-based company?
I believe it's US, could be Canada. Now you're asking something that I may be off on. Let's see. Riddle Software. Let's see, where's Riddle Software? Also known as RSP Inc. I have no idea if they're in Canada or not, but I believe they're in US. They're also famous for Micro League Wrestling on the C64 and Amiga and DOS. That was the one using the digitized images of the wrestlers, and you just chose moves. It was really, really wonky and weird.
Did Spy vs. Spy on the Game Boy? Because that's also not a great game.
No. As far as I know, they didn't do that port.
Or at least I don't really like it. Maybe people enjoy it, but
I've never played it on the Game Boy. On a Game Boy Color, you mean?
I think it's a game. Yeah, maybe.
The Game Boy Color game. And yeah, the Game Boy Color game, I'm looking at screenshots of it right now. It looks like it's replicating the old game with the split screen, and
I feel it's...
Yeah.
Yeah, I see a color game, but... Yeah, there's also a regular Game Boy game.
Okay.
Spy vs. Spy, yeah.
Okay, because the Game Boy Color game got some good reviews.
Operation Booby Trap, it's called.
Operation Booby Trap? Really? That's a terrible name for a game. Absolutely terrible name.
I just, yeah.
Oh, okay, I see it now. Oh, yeah, okay, this actually looks like it's a port of Spy vs. Spy 2, the Island Caper. So there were 3 games in the series on 8-bit and some 16-bit home micros. And that's Spy vs. Spy, Spy vs. Spy 2, the Island Caper, and Spy vs. Spy 3 Arctic Antics. And these graphics look like it's a port of the second game, but yeah, without the split screen, I don't know how you would play this. And yeah, this one gets terrible reviews.
I think you have to, then you, it's no split screen, but you just change the character all the time. And it's just the whole screen changes to the other character. Instead of doing the top part and the bottom part, it's just their own screen.
Yeah. So, well, and just looking at it, it looks like the big problem is the the way they did the graphics. One of the things that you do in the game is plant bombs, for example.
Yeah, booby traps for the other one or something.
Yeah, and if you can't see them well, and in the C64 version they'd use slight changes in the textures or just it kind of blended in. You had to be paying attention, but you could still see it on a monitor. And it looks like the reviews are complaining about that. But it also has a link cable function, so it might actually be a worthwhile game if you can play it link cable.
Well, maybe I should try that once.
Yeah, because Spy vs. Spy was fun in the single-player version, but the real game happened when you had the two players, because you're trying to, in the second game, you're trying to collect pieces of this torpedo that have been spread out across this desert island, and at the same time laying traps for the other spy, because every time the other spy dies, they drop whatever pieces of the torpedo they've already collected, and you can see what the other person's doing, and then you can also knife fight each other if you really get to that point. But the idea is get all the pieces of the torpedo together and then rush out and find the submarine that is off the coast of the island someplace.
Yeah, Spy vs. Spy is pretty big cartoon, I think, in the US.
It was a comic strip in Mad Magazine.
Comic strip. Oh, that's it. Yeah, I never heard of it before playing
Antonio
the game.
Prohias. He was a Cuban exile who then landed at Mad Magazine and started doing the Spy vs. Spy strip, which was without words because he couldn't speak English. And absolutely amazing stuff. I was a huge Spy vs. Spy fan before I played the game, and the game really just captured the chaos and wackiness of the comic strip in a way that really I had never seen in a video game before. And that's why, among C64 nuts, it's still one of the top games of all time.
And it's probably a good laugh or something. It's more like a game where you laugh out loud when you play it or something.
There's
sort of
a lot
party
of
game.
Funny moments, but also just it's the franticness of trying to figure out. And it also, each time you reload the levels, it algorithmically changes the shape of the levels and the layout. So you're not getting the same thing each time.
Like a
which
roguelike.
Yeah, and also the stuff is hidden in different places each time, so that you can keep replaying it. It's not like, now I memorized where all the parts are, I'm just going to go in and grab them. They're hidden in different places, so it becomes this frantic search everything, try to find the parts, and at the same time, keep an eye on the other half of the screen to see where the enemy is, what they've already collected, and if you figured out where the exit is, maybe put a whole bunch of traps right in front of the exit to blow them up before they can get out or whatever else.
Sounds like fun.
Oh, it is. It's a great game. I highly recommend it. Maybe in '84 when we finally get there, maybe we can do some online gaming with it for 7 Minutes in Heaven. That
would be really fun.
Yeah.
I'm looking forward to it. But it's in 2 years, yeah. So
2 years.
Only 2 years.
Almost there. Yeah.
Okay, Hudson announces...
Okay, let's move on.
I already moved on.
Sorry.
Hudson announces RISC-based console.
Slated for a 1993 launch in Japan, Hudson Soft has announced their plan to release a CD-ROM-based system using a RISC processor that will also feature custom chips to do zoom and rotation effects.
So Mode 7.
A little bit more than Mode 7. They're already looking at it as a much bigger thing. Now, this is coming after their original PC Engine follow-up, the Super Graphics, which was a bust, only had like 3 games released for it. And this system is no doubt the Tetsuyan, which will get previewed a couple of times, but will quickly be partially scrapped and reworked into the FMV-focused PC FX, which when it finally comes out will look outdated in comparison with the Jaguar, 3DO, Saturn, and PlayStation.
That was also a bust, I think. PC FX.
It's a bust. It's a system that is, and we've talked about this, how in this period of time, the whole FMV thing, digital graphics and so forth, with Mortal Kombat, is a buzzword. And we're also going to see later in this episode where the counterpoint is coming. So it's going to be these two ways of going with games. And they bet on FMV. So they release, dating sims and crap like that, and that have limited play value, look really pretty in screenshots, but have limited play value. And by the time this thing gets released, it just can't compare with the 3D systems.
It's maybe also not a good idea to release a new system and then immediately announce another one.
Well, the Super Graphics is already dead at this point. They released that the previous year, and everybody knows it's a bust. So,
still,
and the fact that they're going to be using a RISC processor for this is already kind of cool and forward thinking, especially when you see what is in the current generation of machines, because the Super NES is using a 16-bit version of the 6502, and the Genesis is using a 68,000.
And RISC is more powerful.
Well, RISC is different.
Okay.
More focused. Okay, let's move on.
Learn to play the piano on your console.
The Miracle Piano by Software Toolworks promises to teach you how to play the piano through fun games on your console or home computer by hooking up a MIDI keyboard to your existing device and offering up learning software and even some games. The hefty price tag, between $300 and $420, will ultimately make it a flop, though.
Mm-hmm. And for what systems was this? Because it says console or home computer, but
they had hookups so you can connect it to an NES, a Super NES, Amiga, DOS. They also released software for a bunch of these systems, so they were trying to make it as open as possible, as an open-ended platform, and trying to make it also available on as many hardware platforms as possible. But unfortunately,
it also sounds really unfocused.
It's not really unfocused. It's just that it's focusing on something that not enough people care about.
Not for that price.
Not for that price. I mean, it's a good idea, and the idea, you can learn by playing and so forth. But unfortunately, it's, there's not enough people who want to learn to play who aren't just going to go out and learn to play.
But I can imagine if, just for example, there are like the Guitar Heroes variants nowadays, which are actually out there to learn guitar.
Yeah,
I think Rocksmith or something. Maybe?
Yeah, but how many units has Rocksmith sold as opposed to Guitar Hero? Okay.
not many.
Yeah, exactly. It's really a non-entity in the marketplace. And this one is basically going to fail for those same reasons. It's just there's not enough demand really for it. It's an idea that's great on paper, but there's simply not enough demand for it.
I could see it work maybe for $50 or something, like a toy.
Exactly.
Like
but
a toy more.
You can't sell a whole MIDI keyboard for that, especially not at this point in time.
No, so it would be more like a controller looking like a keyboard, something like that.
Exactly.
So something what Nintendo maybe could have made at the time.
Out of cardboard, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, let's leave console behind. Let's get to the real meat of the episode, computers.
EA wants a piece of the CRPG pie.
For the last 2 years, Electronic Arts has been working on a relaunch of The Bard's Tale, the RPG trilogy from Interplay that they published back in the 80s. Since Interplay became a publisher, EA hasn't been a real player in this arena, and they want back in, according to producer Rick Lucas. The Bard's Tale 4 is the biggest and most expensive project at EA, so much so that the retail price would have to be at least 1.5 times the normal price of a game to cover its costs. The massive game, the last big game to release on disc, according to Lucas, will be supported with a full multimedia campaign, including a series of novels, comic books, miniatures, board games, and possibly even a movie adaptation. EA is all in on turning The Bard's Tale into the next big epic fantasy franchise.
That's ambitious plans.
Very ambitious plans, and it really shows the importance of computer RPGs at this point in that market space, that they'd be willing to invest this. And all of this information is coming out of a preview article in the German magazine Powerplay. Now, the original Bard's Tale is very much, you see everything from the first-person point of view in a little window, and you move 90-degree angles and one block at a time type of gameplay. This new one, the only things they show are some obviously cutscene images, of a city burning and stuff, and one image of apparently the combat engine, which is seen from the side, and it looks really, really terrible. I mean, the graphics look bad. Even by the standards of this day. So it's kind of it's hard to tell what's going on with this project, but they do end up releasing the novels, do come out, and that's the only thing I can tell comes out. And it's a whole series of novels. There's like 6 or 7 of them. I'll put a link to a list of them in the show notes. And they're from some big name people like Mercedes Lakey and stuff. So there was something going on here, but it appears that the project just gets killed when EA buys Origin. And the news isn't in these magazines yet, but they buy Origin on September 25th, 1992.
And Origin has better CRPG projects? Or?
They have Ultima. Ultima Underworld.
So they have to pour all that money in those projects instead.
Well, it's already an established thing. They've got functioning engines. There's really, and I have no confirmation on this, but the Bard's Tale 4, this Bard's Tale 4 project just disappears. There's no other mention of it anywhere. And there will be another Bard's Tale 4 project like 7 or 8 years later that we'll get some screenshots again, but that's a fully 3D game, and that also doesn't go anywhere. And there is a Bard's Tale 4, but that's Brian Fargo, the original Interplay guy, getting the rights back and releasing that game through In Exile.
And that's super recent, I think.
That's just the last couple of years, yeah. But just to give you an idea of how competitive and big the CRPG market is in this time.
What other CRPGs were?
Computer RPGs, as opposed to JRPGs, Japanese ones.
But what other were there at the time?
Oh, let's see. It's the bread and butter of PC gaming. So in this month's Powerplay magazine, I'm just going off this one issue of this one German magazine. We have Lord of the Rings, The Two Towers, Ishar, Spelljammer, Spellcraft, and then, of course, we also have point-and-click adventures. I'm putting those in this category just because they appeal to a lot of the same people. Laura Bow, The Dagger of Amon-Ra, Quest for Glory 1 VGA Remake. That was a hybrid of RPG and this. Leather Goddesses of Phobos 2, which was an adventure game. Warriors of Relaine, another RPG. Crime City, also an RPG. And Conquistador, which was an RPG with some slight strategy elements.
Wow, I never played any of these.
Well, and I played a few of them. The Lord of the Rings, The Two Towers was the second in the supposed trilogy of RPGs by Interplay using the Lord of the Rings license. The third one never comes out because both of the first two suck.
Is that the one which also gets ported to the Super NES?
Yeah, the Super NES gets a port of the first one, the Fellowship.
Yeah, that's not a great game.
Yeah. I played that on the Amiga. Two Towers doesn't get ported, no loss. Ishar is a French series that gets 2 sequels. It's again the Eye of the Beholder type of perspective with some really nice graphics. Spelljammer is the continuation of SSI's expansion using the newer TSR worlds. That one actually gets some fairly good reviews. Spellcraft, I can't even remember what that one was.
They all sound so generic.
Spelljammer is very much not generic because it was giant organic-based spaceships that look like galleons traveling between the different D&D worlds as planets.
Interesting.
So it's spacefaring, it's space trading, it's
and
RPG,
fantasy.
and you can land on the different planets and basically be in those different game worlds. It was very cool in that sense. But it was very out there. It was a hard
That's just something I never experienced. Maybe I should go back in time sometime and
give
look some of
Spelljammer a check. Give Spelljammer a check. I can't remember how many games they released. This first one looks like it's using a altered version of the Gold Box engine. I don't know if they kept using that for... No, there's, I think, only one game in the Spelljammer series. Yeah, there's only one game released with the Spelljammer license.
I see art of it and it looks interesting. I'm not real big into fantasy, but this, like sci-fi fantasy, I can get into.
Yeah, and it's also one of the first games that from SSI using digitized images. So some of the images of people in the game are drawn, but then there's a whole bunch of images of NPCs and stuff that are digitized images. And so you start to see this, change, if you will, that move towards these different types of production methods for these games. Okay. Let's move on
to other PC games, and that's Wolfenstein gets reviewed.
Video games and computer entertainment review id Software's latest shareware game. Why would a major publication bother with shareware? Because it's hard to believe such a technological masterpiece is shareware. And as the reviewers note, such 3D action begs the question as to whether or not digitized multimedia is really the next big thing.
Yeah, it's really a game changer.
It's interesting to see that the last few months there's been a lot of talk in the magazines about how digitized images are going to be the future. This is the way to go. This is the way we bring realism. And Mortal Kombat seemed to see this is where we're going. Wolfenstein, not only is it pioneering or solidifying the shareware model, and it's weird because all the other id Software games don't really get reviews. I mean, the Keen games didn't get reviewed and so forth. It's just really, really weird that this one gets a review. It's revolutionary. It's game-changing, bringing action and the 3D. Obviously, it's not the first. We already saw Ultima Underworld, but this is going to be the new dichotomy, the two different philosophies about gaming for the next couple of years. The whole digitized multimedia side on one thing, and using the 3D technology, 3D environments on the other, as two opposing high-end gaming philosophies. So
yeah, and also the difference of Wolfenstein is that it's relatively fast 3D gaming, so it's not like a slideshow.
Exactly, and that is going to it's a big change from most PC games, like we just talked about. All those RPGs, all those point-and-click adventure games are very slow paced. They're mostly turn based, and suddenly here we've got something that is so fast paced. It's like, I don't want to say bullet hell, but it's not something that you're expecting on a DOS compatible PC game, and it has the polish of amazing programming behind it as well. So the PC got its real push forward with Wing Commander. Now it's just basically getting it's all the way at the edge of the cliff thanks to Wolfenstein 3D. Yeah, and speaking of it,
Germany gets Wolfenstein 3D barred from CompuServe.
The German government has gotten CompuServe to take down the new 3D action game Wolfenstein 3D from its shareware boards, as the game violates the country's bans on the use of swastikas in entertainment products.
And I think I just heard the bars are lifted now.
Yeah, they just lifted it. Now, actually, they lifted it, I think, 2 years ago. Was the 20? I think it was like a 25-year ban or something. But this isn't the official ban yet. That's still coming. And ban is not the correct term. It's you're not allowed to sell it over the counter. You're not allowed to advertise it. Blah blah blah. Basically, it doesn't officially ban it, but it makes it essentially impossible to procure. And once that was lifted, they still had to go through the process of getting a age label set for it, and that just got done this last month. Mm-hmm. So so now officially we can buy Wolfenstein 3D in Germany.
Yay! Oh yeah, you're in Germany. So.
Exactly.
But they're really strict on that stuff. I worked 10 years ago. I worked on a Flash on a Flash game site, and we also had the German variation of it. And there were just so many games on that website. So there were also games maybe with swastikas in there, and we had the German version. And my boss actually got arrested.
Oh wow! Really?
Because of it, and it was really like a big deal back then. We had to search the whole site through just everything with violence we removed because of it, and it was really a big deal. And I was just like laughing about it. I thought, what? Why is he in so much trouble because of it? But it's just because there were some games on that Flash site which is mainly like bubble shooter games and maybe card games and stuff like that. But there's maybe somewhere in the pile of Flash games a game with a swastika in there, and he got into a really lot of trouble. So,
oh, jeez.
And that was only 10 years ago. So
yeah,
they're probably still.
Yeah. Oh no, it's still a huge deal. I mean, the later Wolfensteins do come out in Germany, but yeah, all the symbols have been modified. Even games like Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade had all the swastikas removed and replaced with crosses movies? Or something. The movies were allowed. The movies get a pass, and I don't know exactly what the rules are there, as long as it's not glorified or anything like that. But in video games and digital entertainment, it's still very much a no-no.
Maybe because of its interactive or something. But,
basically,
that you maybe can play as a Nazi as well or something like that.
No, you couldn't, but still, it's just the idea of the game as a kid's thing. It's that legacy of, it's for kids, so we've got to do it.
Well, it's also history, so.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, yeah, it's a sensitive topic and it's not something that should be taken lightly.
Nope. Okay.
Yes.
Let's continue. BBS gets shut down.
Davy Jones's Locker, a BBS run by Richard Kennedick, I think I'm pronouncing that right, of Massachusetts, is the first of its kind shut down under the new, tougher laws against copyright piracy, the ones that we talked about at the beginning of the show. The BBS limited access to the pirated material, but users could increase their access by uploading additional files. Kennedick would end up being sentenced in 1995, by which time the law had been enhanced, making the crime a felony.
So what I don't understand of this story is that in 1992 he got arrested, or they removed the server, I think, or they shut it down.
Yeah, he gets arrested. He gets arrested in 92.
He also gets arrested, but he gets sentenced at 1995.
Yeah, it takes 3 years for the case to go to trial.
But then the law is changed, and he gets.
No, he still gets he still qualifies as a misdemeanor.
Ah, okay.
But by the time he's convicted, any new people would have been the same thing would have gotten them a felony.
Ah, so he dodged the bullet there.
Yeah, he dodged a bullet at this point. They're getting tougher and tougher with these copyright laws as time progresses. Under the philosophy, well, if people are still doing it, it's only because we didn't make the crime punished harsh enough. Which, punishing people harder does not stop crime.
No, that's not always
not how it
working. No,
but that's the American way.
Yeah.
So and he, it's one of these things. He's not charging for it, which in theory should get him out under this law because that they tried to make it about making money off of it, but one of the aspects that they're going for here is that the people who could get more access to it by uploading more, so they're trying to say that that's part of the compensation aspect.
Okay.
Yeah. So it's
Let's talk about something more lighthearted. Zap Packs makes game characters collectible.
A new series of trading cards, Zap Packs, features game characters from a variety of games, primarily NES titles, such as Adventure Island 2, Battletoads, and the unbelievably poorly named SCAT. Scat. Yeah.
I never heard of these, so probably...
You never heard of Battletoads or Adventure Island?
No, not about Zap Packs. Or the trading cards.
They don't last very long. Put a link in the show notes to a website that has a bunch of these scanned. They're terrible artwork. I mean, absolutely.
So it's artwork and not sprites? Or?
No, it's artwork. And on the back of the cards, they give you little hints, game hints, I guess. But it's kind of a weird problem because they can only use characters from games that they've gotten licenses for. And they're clearly not getting the licenses to the really good games or the really popular games. So, Adventure Island 2, Battletoads, Scat, and they're bringing this out, as the NES is really on its downward spiral.
Yeah.
So, Double Dragon also they did. And
But they make their art themselves.
Oh, yeah, the art is their own stuff, and it's really, really bad.
Wow, that's unfortunate. It could be a nice thing to display or own nowadays, but
I guess if they had gotten like cool Sonic and Mario or something, but it's a weird little fly by night thing that's not going to last.
Unfortunate. Okay. Amiga makes Babylon 5 fly.
Upcoming TV movie Babylon 5 will feature massive space stations and battles thanks to the Amiga, the video toaster, and Lightwave 3D rendering software. Only Amiga makes it possible at this low budget.
Is this looking all right, or is it...
Oh, Babylon 5 for the time looked amazing because it was the first major television show that was using 3D graphics for the spaceships. So Star Trek at this point, Star Trek Deep Space Nine comes out, I think, the next year.
Models, maybe.
Well, they used it for the portals, and the going to light speed effect was all computer generated, but they were still using physical models for the ship. So, they might talk about, oh, it's a big battle and stuff, but you would never see more than 2 or 3 ships on screen at a time. Babylon 5 comes along, and suddenly, you've got the giant spaceship, space station. You've got a dozen little ships flying around it. You've got a giant nebula in the background. You could do all these things because they were 3D rendered images. And also what they would do is, because it's supposed to be this giant space station and they're doing this on a relatively low budget, they would make a room in the space station. One side would be a physical thing. The other side would be 3D rendered. So, when they're moving the camera back and forth, it makes the room look bigger because one of the person's close-ups is not against a physical object, but blue screen, and they would render in the backgrounds. So it made the whole thing. Yeah, it made the whole thing look cool. Now, if you watch it on DVD later on, it looks terrible because there's a slightly different when they're rendering the one view, it's at a lower resolution.
Oof. So it's lower than 420, or what is it? 240p.
Well, you have to remember they're filming it probably on film or at least high-end video. But when they're doing the lightwave production, if you're watching on old TV, it's cool because the scan lines hide all of that. Mm-hmm. But if you watch it on a modern screen on DVD, you really tell when they're switching from one camera to the other, it's a different resolution suddenly.
Yeah, if it was really shot on film, then you can scan it in nowadays and make it 4K if you want.
Yeah.
But of course, those 3D rendered stuff you have to build from the ground up if you want anything out of it. I recently played the Command & Conquer remake. So I think this released like 2 or 3 years ago. And they upscaled all the videos. And I'm sorry it doesn't look great. You really see that it's like AI upscaled, and I rather look at it the normal way, at the old resolution, I guess.
Well, also I don't think they had the original material anymore.
No, they didn't.
They had to use the already compressed video from the game from back then.
Yeah. So
which just further deteriorated.
Yeah.
And also the AI upscaling wasn't as good a couple years ago. If they did it nowadays, it would probably look much better. But, and the other thing here is they're doing this on an Amiga with a video toaster. Now, the video toaster worked because it was taking advantage of some tricks inherent to the NTSC video modes and the way that the Amiga is processing video with the Genlock. So it's very, very specific. There was no way to render a really high resolution version of it and print that to film or so. It was just basically doing tricks thanks to Scanline NTSC. But the show is amazing. I highly recommend it. If you haven't watched Babylon 5, I'm a big fan of the series. J. Michael Straczynski, big epic storyline, big morality questions in a very cool sci-fi setting with a lot of different species and characters and interactions and stuff. It's good. Very good stuff.
Well, I might check it out because I really like those shows. I think I've seen Babylon 5 maybe twice or something, but it's not. I wasn't really big on. I always watched Star Trek with my dad back in the day.
And I didn't watch it back in the day either. I binged it several years later after it had finished. And the thing is, if you try to jump in at any one point on Babylon 5, forget about it.
That's probably the problem. That's why we didn't watch it.
Yeah, you have to jump in on the first episode and watch it in order. It's just one of those shows. And it's really the first major show that does that, where that continuity is so important. But okay, that's another issue. But Amiga is making this possible. Woohoo!
Always good. Okay, another TV show. Battletoads to take to the airwaves.
With the success of the NES game and arcade and Super NES titles in the works, Rare's TMNT knockoff Battletoads is getting the cartoon treatment thanks to the good people at Deke, famous for Inspector Gadget.
And it never released?
They only made a pilot episode, and it's so unbelievably terrible. And I mean unbelievably terrible.
Yeah, but was that a problem? At the time, there were a lot of terrible TV shows we watched.
There were a lot of terrible TV series. There's a link to the pilot episode. It's up on YouTube. I dare you to get through it. I dare you. That's how bad this is.
Okay.
It's that bad.
It could be cool. The Battletoads are pretty cool characters.
If they had done it right, it would have been cool. They did not do it right, is all I'm saying.
Yeah.
Very much not did it right.
So wasn't it like the game, or was it just a terrible story, or was it ugly looking, or what?
No, it's apparently the Battletoads are 3 teenagers turned by a magical amulet or something into the Battletoads, and they have to rescue this girl, and it's just bad. It's just terrible.
Okay.
Terrible.
Well, let's forget about it.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's a good thing. Let's do that.
Next on, Virgin buys Westwood.
Yeah, corporate news. Woohoo! UK publisher Virgin has acquired Westwood Studios. The company had made a name for themselves with BattleTech and D&D licenses such as Dragon Strike and, of course, Eye of the Beholder. The acquisition comes as two major titles, The Legend of Corandia and Dune 2, are in the works.
What did Westwood release at this point?
Westwood, the Eye of the Beholder 1 and 2. They had also done a bunch of they did some of the Gold Box games. They did BattleTech, 2 different BattleTech games. One which was a top-down strategy game. Another one which was a 3D from the cockpit view, the predecessor to BattleTech 2, which is going to be the big, huge one. And that also got adapted into an online game, Dragon Strike, which was a dragon flight simulator. They had also done a bunch of porting work early on in their careers. I think they also did a couple games for Sierra early on. So they had been a studio that had been around for quite a while, doing a lot of different types of games, but very little where you'd be like, "Ooh, this is them." For a while, they were called Westwood Associates, I think was the original name, and then became Westwood Studios.
Because I really started to know them from Dune 2, I think.
Yeah, Dune 2 is their big breakout game.
That I played that so much. And Dune 1 they didn't make, right?
No, and this is this weird story where there's competing people in Virgin who have commissioned 2 different games based off the Dune license. And the only reason the one is called Dune 2 and the other one's called Dune 1 is because one of them was ready to ship earlier. But they're completely different teams that didn't even know about each other until the last moment.
Oh, wow, that's crazy. And what I know is that Dune 1 is also a good game.
Yeah, it's also a good game, but it's not quite the super solid gold-plated classic that is Dune 2. It has a lot of strategy elements, but it's also more of an adventure. The Dune 1 engine is going to get reused in a couple of games, like one of the games is called KGB, and can't remember the name of the other. But that's being done by a French studio.
But Dune 1 is released in 92. Actually, it's in the list of this month.
Exactly. Different versions of it got released throughout this year. So there's an Amiga version, a DOS version. There's going to be a port to the Sega Mega CD. And I don't know if there's any other ports. I know of at least those 3.
And it's all published by Virgin?
All published by Virgin because Virgin had the rights to Dune. Huh. And so then Dune 2 comes out because that was another project running simultaneously, but different people inside of Virgin were competing with one another and didn't even know that the one guy who given the commission to Westwood to do the game didn't tell his higher ups that game was still in development.
Wow.
Yeah.
So welcome into a time without internet.
Well, it was basically just it probably would have gotten fired if it hadn't been successful. But, just kept funneling money to this project in the hopes that it would be really big and stuff.
Huh.
Yeah. And then The Legend of Corandia is a point-and-click adventure. One of the very first with no verbs or anything. It's just, click on stuff and stuff happens. So that's pretty innovative and will also get its 2 sequels. So... Westwood is going to do a lot under Virgin and will ultimately be bought up by
EA.
Yeah, but it's really EA buys Virgin USA and gets Westwood and a bunch of other studios in the mix. But Westwood is the crown jewel of that purchase.
Yeah, I really love the games of them. And were really liked. There was always a Westwood game on my PC.
Yeah,
back in the day. Yeah. Okay, Microprose misses targets.
Microprose, which went public in late 1991, has seen its stock drop down to its IPO level due to 4 key and very expensive games missing their targets. Darklands, B-17 Flying Fortress, Mantis, and David Ledbetter's Greens. The games were pushed back a quarter, spooking the markets. Unfortunately, the extra work the games will need to get them back on track, in addition to other big titles like Rex Nebular, which will dramatically underperform, will ultimately lead to the company's merger with Spectrum Holobyte.
These are not titles I remember. Maybe Darklands says something to me, but all the other ones?
Yeah, well, this is and again, if you want more detail on this, my interview with Wild Bill Steely, co-founder of Microprose, goes into all the details here. But what was happening at this point was Microprose had just basically lost a ton of money on their arcade ventures. They were trying to diversify out of the flight simulator niche that they were in. They had success now with the turn-based strategy games like Civilization, which is still selling like hotcakes at this point. But a lot of these projects had been in development for at least a year or two at this point, so before Civilization takes off. And it was really attempts by Microprose to become, not just a niche developer. They wanted to be able to have a little bit of everything. Darklands is this giant RPG game. B-17 Flying Fortress is a flight sim, but that's coming from Vector Graphics company that we just talked about them buying a couple months ago, an English firm. Mantis, I believe, is an adventure game. I can't remember. David Ledbetter's Greens is a golf game because Lynx obviously is hot. Rex Nebular is a point-and-click adventure game that's trying to be one part Space Quest, one part Leisure Suit Larry, failing at both. But the big problem with these games, especially Darklands and Rex Nebular, is they require the creation of brand new game engines.
Okay, yeah.
And those are expensive to build. And if the games flop and you never make another game in those genres, you just wasted a ton of money. This is similar to the story we were talking about with Bard's Tale 4, where he was like, the producer was like, yeah, we're going to lose money on this game, but we're making this game engine that's going to be great for the future. Well, guess what? If you don't make a second game with that engine, that's it. You are not recouping your investment.
And Microprose, they still had a really niche, I think, in the end, because I think I only know them from like Civilization type of games, like the more simulation kind of games.
Their big thing were the flight and military simulations: Gunship, F-15 Strike Eagle, F-117 Stealth Bomber, things like that. But then they also had the Sid Meier's Pirates. Sid Meier's
Sid Meier's game.
Civilization. Sid Meier is the other co-founder. And games like Special Forces, Airborne Ranger. They're gonna stay in the game for a little bit longer here, but the bleeding is too great. They're gonna end up getting bailed out, if you will, by Spectrum Holobyte, another company that's more famous than anything for flight sims. But ultimately, it's not a pairing that's going to function, and the rights are going to end up ultimately at Atari, Infogram, and then what is today the modern Atari. And a lot of those older games can actually be purchased as digital downloads on Atari's website, curiously enough. And Sid Meier's going to get the rights back to games like Pirates and Civilization at some point. And
his name is on it. So.
Exactly. And he's going to release new versions of those. But yeah, Microprose has just made too many bad bets, didn't get onto console fast enough. When they do finally go on console, they're just not going to be developing the games the way they need to be developed for consoles. So there's going to be a lot of expensive failures there. It's just not unfortunately the company is going to go downhill, but this is really the moment. And Bill Steely, when I talked to him, he made a point about these 4 games that missed their target. That's the end of the line. And he ratcheted up to the fact that he had taken a vacation for the first time since the founding of the company almost a decade earlier. And he had left these quote-unquote professional managers in charge, and they had not pushed the programmers hard enough to get the games out in time to make the quarterly numbers.
Wow, that's always when looking back, you always know. So maybe it didn't change anything when he stayed there and not take the vacation. So
well, if the games had come out in time and they would have been able to register the profits, maybe that would have prevented the stock from collapsing as hard as it did. But once the stock dropped, that also hurt the credit rating of the company and everything else. Yeah.
So another company in bad weather, HAL Labs files for bankruptcy.
HAL of Japan has filed for bankruptcy as their Famicom game Metal Slayer Glory, which had been in development for 4 years and was the largest game ever released for the Famicom at 1 megabyte of size, has failed to recoup its costs. Part of the problem was that the game used the MMC5 add-on chip, and Nintendo only sold HAL a limited number of these chips, limiting their production run of the game.
I never heard of this game. Somehow I love HAL Laboratory games, but Metal Slayer Glory, it's probably
never gets out of Japan.
Yeah, but
like I said, it's the largest Famicom game ever. Requires this extra special chip to pull off certain graphical effects like parallax and so forth, and it just basically bankrupts the company. It costs them way too much to develop. And they just can't, and they're sticking to the Nintendo and their entertainment system, to the 8-bit for way too long.
Oh yeah, of course. Super Nintendo was already out. Yeah,
exactly, and already for a couple of years.
Yeah.
So, and this is the problem: the game just took too long to develop. Now, Nintendo would end up saving HAL from bankruptcy, but make a requirement of that aid that HAL agree to appoint one of their producers, one of the guys who actually worked on Metal Slayer Glory, at least for a time, Satoru Iwata, to head the company. So this is how Satoru Iwata becomes head of HAL and would later become head of Nintendo.
Yeah, that's... And he did it very well at the end, I think.
The Wii U?
Yeah.
Seriously?
Well, it was not a bad device, but maybe the vision behind it wasn't great. And also the 3DS also had some problems, but you can't win it all.
No.
Like the Wii, only the Wii he did, right? He was
still there when the Wii comes out? No, yeah, he's already in charge when the Wii comes out.
Yeah. So
the Wii is his, the Wii U is also his.
And the 3DS as well.
And the 3DS. Yeah. So, I mean, it's not a terrible track record. I'm just saying, this is an interesting way of him getting into this position.
Yeah, especially if your company gets sort of bankrupt because of your product, then you're suddenly head of the company.
Yeah, and I'm not quite sure on the history of Metal Slayer Glory whether or not he was only a producer on it for a while or what his relationship to that project was. But the project went on for 4 years, so obviously there was a lot of blame to go around. And the game is apparently quite the cult classic. But yeah, it's just.
I'm watching screenshots of it, and it's a lot of Japanese text.
It's a lot of Japanese text. It's one of those. I don't even know if it's more of a graphic novel type thing or not a graphic novel. What do they call them again? Basically it's text with still shots, and you just click your way through to the end. What are they called again? What's the genre? Yeah, exactly. Exactly. That's the genre.
That one. I actually see a screenshot of a translated version, so we can try.
Yeah.
It's like a dating sim or something. It looks like a dating sim.
It probably looks like that. Yeah.
Graphical adventure.
Not graphical. There's a word for it, and I'll think of it as soon as I'm done here, and Ethan will be able to add it to the next.
Okay, Ethan, you need to jump in.
There you go. Visual novel. Visual novel. That's it. Yeah. And yeah, so it's with giant mechs, teenagers, and some weird godlike thing going on. It's just the way it is. But it's Japanese.
Luckily, HAL got bought and and they're not bankrupt because I still enjoy their games.
Oh yeah, no,
the recent Kirby game is great.
Yeah, I mean Kirby is absolutely awesome on every level. And but yeah, so this game is the one that basically pushes the company to the brink, and Satoru Iwata is then the hand-picked successor by Nintendo. So this really is going to connect the two companies in a way that is going to be pretty inextricable going forward. Okay, that's the end of this very, very short episode. That means that, Wouter, you have one more task. What is the word of the episode?
I don't know if it's a word, but the because of the 7 minutes in heaven, I'll choose FMV.
FMV, I love it. FMV it is, because that's going to be the future of gaming, right? Wolfenstein 3D? Okay. Okay, everybody, remember, if you like the show, hit like, subscribe, 5-star ratings, and support us on Patreon if you so desire. Helps cover the cost of hosting and all that good rot, and also just makes us feel nice and warm and fuzzy on the inside. And if you have any questions, send us an email, and check out Wouter's Twitch. Also link in the show notes below. He's going to probably be playing his new Quake map here at some point in the near future.
Yeah, it releases. It releases at the 29th, I heard.
Okay, so it will have been released by the time you hear this. Yep. Congratulations, everybody. Okay, then, in that case, have fun.
Bye.
Awesome.